So glad to be here today with all of you to talk about the American Rescue Plan and what it means for the people of Seattle. Were already in a housing crisis before this pandemic. And from 2019 to 2020, Washington State had the third largest increase in people experiencing homelessness in the country. And this past year, as the pandemic has driven up unemployment and income loss, we've seen even more people grapple with this housing insecurity. I have been speaking to people from across the state who are in these situations and to housing providers like the folks that are on the call with me today about what they need to keep people in Seattle safe and secure and housed. And I took those stories and experiences from here in Seattle and across the state with me back to the other Washington to help fight for relief in the American Rescue Plan. And while we are by no means done, we were able to secure some very critical relief. So I'm excited to talk with all of you today to hear from folks about the impact of the federal relief so I can continue to advocate and on this issue in the Senate. But first, just let me talk a little bit about what we did do in the American Rescue Plan. I think by now, a lot of people know that the American Rescue Plan put money into families' pockets. It gave our schools the resources they need to open, reopen, and stay open safely. We're getting shots into arms so we can end this pandemic as soon as possible. We gave our states and local and tribal governments the resources they need to get through this pandemic and so much more. And part of that so much more is billions of dollars to help keep people in their homes or get them assistance for the housing that they need. That included emergency rental assistance funding, including more than $400 million for Washington State, a new homeowner assistance fund to help people avoid foreclosure through mortgage payment assistance, and funding for services and emergency housing vouchers for people who are experiencing homelessness. And that, by the way, builds off the hundreds of millions in rental assistance for Washington State that we're able to secure in the package we passed in December for COVID. With 1 in 5 renters across the country saying they did not pay last month's rent, this assistance can mean the difference between keeping a roof over your head or not. And as with so many of the health and economic consequences of this pandemic, people of color have been even more likely to face housing insecurity. 1 in 3 Black renters have recently been unable to pay rent, and homeowners of color have faced some of the highest risks of foreclosure. So this relief is going to go a long ways towards helping renters and homeowners of color remain housed. And I want to be clear that just that we passed this bill does not mean we are done. Because as I said, we were experiencing a housing crisis long before this pandemic. So just getting back to where we were as the pandemic started is not good enough. We have to build back fairer and stronger. We've got to do a better job with housing and making the investments that we need. So I am delighted to have a great panel with me today who are going to talk about this, what they're seeing, what's working, what's happening on the ground, what needs to be done. And with that, let me turn it over to Darryl if you want to introduce yourself and go ahead and speak. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Murray. It's such an honor to be here with you today, and thank you for the invitation. I want to really highlight something that the Senator said, that during this crisis last year, there were literally thousands of families that faced housing insecurity. HomeSight, which has been around for about 30 years here in Seattle, we are a statewide lender helping families generate that generational wealth, if you will, through home ownership. We are a housing council provider. We're also a community place-based development corporation, but a role we played during 2020 was really directly in the crisis itself. In 2020, we were able to, through our partnerships with the Washington State Housing Finance Commission, the City of Seattle, and housing counselor providers such as the Urban League right here in Seattle and others, we helped 77 families avoid the next steps toward foreclosure directly because there were CARES Act dollars that came through the federal government that we were able to essentially partner with these organizations and make sure that we could help families keep from facing foreclosure. 77 families. Right up to the holiday season, I literally signed off on agreements where a check would go to a family so they could bring their mortgage current. That kept 77 families from facing that really incredibly challenging scenario of having to go into the steps of foreclosure. It's unimaginable during a pandemic and right before the holiday season. So without those dollars, we're looking at 77 families that would have a very, very different picture of their family life and world today had that not happened. So we are incredibly grateful and thankful that we could be a partner in the community with such needy families, not just here in Seattle, but frankly in a 3-county area. And we need that to continue because we understand that the pandemic has revealed for everyone to see the great disparities in home ownership anyway, and the housing crisis that we're all dealing with as providers. So we need to continue this effort very much so that we don't have multiple families facing the possibility of foreclosure. It's horrific. And these dollars are desperately needed, and we put them to great use. So I really want to thank Senator Murray for your efforts to make sure these dollars can continue to come in to keep families stabilized. Having a family lose their housing leads to all sorts of other challenges that the community has to face, and no family should have to face that because of the pandemic and what it's caused. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Gordon McHenry from United Way King County. I know you've done a lot of work in this area as well. You're a great partner in the community, and I appreciate you being here as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Darryl. And thank you, Senator Murray, very much for this opportunity to bring a little light to a really important aspect as we all struggle with this pandemic. And I agree with Darryl. The funds that we have been able to put into play vis-a-vis the federal government and the funds that are getting ready to flow now are life affirming and in many times life saving. So I want to thank Senator Murray for her successful efforts to provide funding for our state and for our region, and for this opportunity to talk about United Way's work during this crisis. It's really important to remind folks that homelessness was a crisis before the pandemic because income overall did not keep up with the unsustainable rent inflation that exists in our county, and which led to a severe shortage of affordable housing. And we also know it's really painful to talk about, but it's a reality. Structural and systemic racism and discrimination is adversely affecting our Black, Latino, and particularly Indigenous folks who experience homelessness at a much higher rate than our white neighbors and residents. The pandemic has hit these populations the hardest. It forced businesses and schools to close, leading to a dramatic loss of income for many of our most vulnerable communities. And we learned, and not surprising, that many people in the community of color don't have the privilege to work from home, to be continued to be employed, and to work in a place that was safe and stable. To give an insight into the economic devastation that we encountered, more than 600,000 people in King County alone filed for unemployment over the past 12 months. And currently tens of thousands remain unemployed, and even more who are underemployed. And people of color have borne the brunt of these layoffs. So last April, United Way, we pivoted some of our work around eviction prevention to address the rapidly rising needs of rental assistance and food relief. We had what we called our Community Relief Fund. We were working with families that had never had to worry about feeding their children, who were suddenly left without income to put food on the table. So it required work with a lot of community-based organizations, the city, the county, corporate partners to provide families and to utilize federal relief funds. For these folks we work with, 70% of the families that received assistance were families of color. And although there were moratoriums on evictions in place, tenants still accumulate debt in the form of rent. And when the moratorium ends, it's very likely we would see a sharp increase in homelessness, which is why we've been very focused on rental assistance as a housing stability, homeless prevention strategy. And we could not have done that without the monies that flowed into our state and into our county from the federal government. This also required great partnerships with King County and the city of Seattle. Since last April, United Way, working with organizations like Solid Ground, Urban League, Wellspring, and others, we've helped more than 10,000 households with rental assistance. keeping them in their place. 3/4 of these households are led by a person of color. So the funds from the American Rescue Plan will help many more of our neighbors and families stay in their homes because this pandemic is still with us, and the racism that we all are concerned about is still with us. We are so thankful for Senator Murray's effort, also to help with expanding tax credits, which are helping lift millions of families out of poverty. We also help college students that we work with stay in their home and complete their education, their pathway to living wage, family wage jobs. Our hope is to emerge out of this crisis stronger, and we know that will only happen if we work together to create a more equitable world. What we cannot do is go back to business as usual, to the before times. That is the one thing we cannot and should not do. Thank you so much, and I'd like to pass it on to my colleague, Shalimar Gonzales of Solid Ground.
Thank you so much, Gordon. Thank you, Darryl. It's a pleasure to be on a panel with both of you. First I want to continue to reiterate and repeat that I thank and we thank Senator Murray for her leadership on behalf of the state of Washington and for inviting us to speak here this afternoon. So I'm Shalimar Gonzales. I'm the CEO of Solid Ground. And for those that are unfamiliar, Solid Ground is an organization whose mission and purpose is really around eradicating and ending poverty and undoing racism and other forms of oppression that are the root causes of poverty. And so what we've already heard from Gordon and Senator Murray and Darryl is this idea that the things that people are experiencing, the disproportionate impacts of the low income and our BIPOC communities are not new when we're talking about housing or when we're talking about oppressions. And so really this idea of how do we take what has been an extremely tough time for folks across the board, and how do we not go back? How do we not repeat the systems that were already in place? How do we start to dismantle those systems? And so excited to be able to partner and continue to partner with United Way and other providers in our region to help provide rental assistance through our home-based program that we have here in the area. Also wanted to share that I'm personally kind of thankful around just the significant amount of rental assistance that was provided through the CARES and the American Rescue Plan legislation, that we know that although short-term kind of rental assistance is not a long-term solution around our ongoing affordable housing crisis in King County and across Washington state, we know that it is currently providing some much needed stability in really dangerous and uncertain times. And so that is kind of the crux of this is serving what we need to serve right now, but also determining what we need to do in the future to continue to improve the systems that are in place. The other piece that I want to just highlight a little bit is we've known for a really long time that to truly ensure housing stability, rental assistance must be paired with eviction prevention services, to have strong tenant protections and tenant organizings. And we've started to see more and more of that happen, not only in 2020, but moving into 2021 and beyond. And so starting to see leaders step forward, starting to see the care and the humanity of each other is so important as we continue to do our work. We've seen our communities come together to organize and ensure our neighbors won't lose their jobs, won't lose their homes, making sure that people have meals. We've seen organizations come together, mutual aid work happening to ensure that people are getting what they need and being able to leverage and utilize those federal dollars to help ensure the ongoing actions that need to happen to keep our tenants safe and housed in safe environments. So the flexible federal spending dollars provided to states and our local governments has allowed our communities to be able to push for the services that they know that we know that will work for our communities, and our communities know will work for them. And so again, that flexibility is the huge part of all this. And a lot of that is thanks to the work of Senator Murray for allowing organizations, for allowing community members to be able to determine how best to utilize those fundings. And then finally, and this is actually something that sometimes we don't talk a lot about, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention it, is to highlight the critical issue that actually Senator Murray continues to be a champion on and has for her entire career when we're talking about domestic violence and being able to provide safe and quality housing for folks that are in crisis when we're talking about domestic violence. And Solid Ground has a program that is able to offer some of those housing options for folks. And Senator Murray has continued to be a champion for that. And we've seen particularly in the past year, a spike in the need of those that need that support. When we're talking about folks that are surviving and working through domestic and sexual violence situations and being able to have the luxury, having the ability to be able to have resources within their community that can help them feel safe and secure as they're looking to start a new life, to feel safe in the environments that they're in. And again, Senator Murray has been so instrumental in that work that we've been able to do. So, I think with the rising vaccination rates, we've all seen in the news, things that are happening, people being able to get shots in arms and all the other things that are going on. We know that our low-income communities will continue to feel the devastating impacts of this pandemic for years to come. It's not just a one-year pandemic or a year and a half when we're all, finally with the vaccinations or availability is there, but we're going to see the long-lasting impacts for years to come. And so again, we want to thank Senator Murray for her continued leadership on housing and other anti-poverty issues. And as we continue to insist that our elected leaders and officials continue to be bold in empowering our communities to recover and thrive for years ahead. Thank you very much.